The History of Bilingual Education by Bailey Tryon. The following cases and laws have all played a huge role in bilingual education and the assessing of needs for ELL students. While some of the cases and laws are not directed to bilingual education or might seem like steps were taken back, they all did their part in shaping the bilingual education that we see today. Meyer versus Nebraska. The Meyer versus Nebraska case of 1923 jump-started the talk of bilingual education. The state of Nebraska had a law in place that said teaching any language other than English in schools would not be allowed. This case deemed that law unconstitutional and was said to violate the 14th Amendment. Mr. Meyer was able to teach German in his school. This was the first case that involved bilingual education and the 14th Amendment. This also protected the parents' rights to organize after school and weekend programs to teach their home language. Brown versus Board of Education. 30 years later, in 1954, Brown versus Board happened. This case overturned the saying, separate but equal, also known as the Plessy versus Ferguson case. This case made it clear that segregation would not be allowed in public places. ELL students could no longer be separated from their other students in their classrooms and should be provided equal education opportunities. The Civil Rights Act of 1964. The Civil Rights Act banned discrimination based on race, color, sex, religion, and national origin. While this case was not directed towards bilingual education and ELLs, it did open the door for better and equal opportunity. This was one of the first steps in modern-day bilingual education. Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965 was signed by President Lyndon B. Johnson to ensure quality and equality education. This was part of the President's War on Poverty. Some of the key components of the ESEA are funds, policies, and procedures that target students of low-income families. Similar to the Civil Rights Act, this was not directed towards bilingual education, but it gave us a little push in the right direction. The Bilingual Education Act is also known as Title VII. Policymakers became more sensitive to bilingual language minorities and ELLs. Funding was provided to some schools to help kickstart bilingual programs. A successful program that came from this was the Coral Way Elementary School in Florida. This program helped Cuban refugees learn English. English instruction was soon to be outlawed, or English-only instruction was soon to be outlawed, and said that it should be taught as a second language. This was a huge step in bilingual education. The Law versus Nickel case of 1974. This case was one of the most important cases of bilingual education history. Chinese American students were thrown into English-only classrooms and basically left on their own to sink or swim. These students were not receiving correct treatment and being denied meaningful education. Justice William Douglas said, "There is no equality of treatment merely by providing students with the same facilities, textbooks, teachers, and curriculum, for students who do not understand English are effectively foreclosed from any meaningful education." After this case was proposed and passed, law remedies would soon go into effect and force districts to implement bilingual education programs in all schools. Next is the Equal Opportunity Act of 1974. The Equal Opportunity Act is the essence of law remedies that I talked about in the previous slide. No state shall deny educational opportunities to an individual on the account of her race, color, sex, or national origin. This includes the failure of an educational agency to take appropriate action to overcome language barriers that impede equal participation by students in its instructional programs. This act still remains in effect today, and many lawsuits have been based and won over this important legislation. Next is the Castaneda v. Pickard case of 1981. Castaneda v. Pickard seemed to be a setback in bilingual education. Raymondville School District fell short of the Equal Education Opportunity Act requirements. A Texas judge did not demand for this bilingual education, but a new test was put into place. This three-pronged test is to determine whether schools are taking appropriate action to address the needs of ELLs as required by the Equal Educational Opportunities Act. While this case seemed to be a step back, at the end of the day, it ended up helping forego other school districts in implementing bilingual education programs. The No Child Left Behind Act was implemented in 2002 by the Bush administration. No Child Left Behind replaced the Elementary and Secondary Education Act that I talked about earlier. This federal policy places heavy emphasis on high-stakes testing in English language arts, math, and science. Grades 3rd through 8th on math and English language arts, and grades 3rd through 12th on science. Each state was able to make an academic standard and hold their schools accountable. This policy brought some attention to ELL needs, but the heavy emphasis on high-stakes tests discouraged bilingual education. While we were focused on ELL's needs, the high-stakes testing did not really help bilingual education. This act and policy had big effect on our growth, but not on education in itself. Every Student Succeeds, which was implemented in 2015 and what we use today. The Every Student Succeeds Act is a federal policy put into place by the Obama administration. This is a reauthorized version of the ESEA. This has a lot of similarities between the No Child Left Behind policy, but allows for greater flexibility when it comes to testing. Title I is a major component of the Every Student Succeeds Act. And it says, a quote that I found says that it is provided to all children significant opportunity to receive a fair, equitable, and high-quality education and to close educational achievement gaps. The Every Student Succeeds is something that we still use today and is still a work in progress when it comes to improving our bilingual education. The courts have played a significant role in the development of policy for English language learners and have made it clear that language minorities have the right to teach their children their home language through private language classes that schools cannot ignore in the linguistic and academic needs of ELLs. That programs of ELLs must be based on sound educational theory, and that ELL programs must be provided with adequate resources that properly trained teachers, and that programs must be evaluated to ensure that they are significant and sufficient in meeting the students' needs. English language learners play a huge part in our everyday schooling. As a future teacher, this topic is very important to me, and as much as I want to be educated on it, I also have to know to educate other students and other people as well. I'm thankful for the cases and policies that have gone into place to help English language learners and bilingual education, and I hope that there is more reform to come. Here are my sites, and thank you for listening to this presentation.